little study here of Barry, and then I'll do a little more finished work of Jennifer with less color, more rendering time on it. And I'll switch up the palette. So the order of colors you put in doesn't matter unless it matters to you, unless you're really learning color, and so having this progression from warm to cool is really helpful. And exactly what green or what blue or whichever you get doesn't matter. You've got to have those three primaries if you're going to get any kind of hint towards the color out there. But exactly which three you use, in this case we're using 2 of each one basically, all that is very fluid and very personal. I've seen artists have 26 colors out there where you'll get 5 or 6 purples, several variations of different values and different temperature purples. I don't recommend that at all, but I've seen it. So let's go ahead and do our little sketch here. And I'm going to kind of lay this out as a composition so we get the various colors working together. And then that'll be about it on this. We won't do too much more of that. So, and then the next one, as I said, we'll work on the finish idea. And I'm going to crop in on this, so what I do have here is a little bigger, and you can see the strokes a little easier on your sometimes small computer screens. And then we can make some kind of design decisions. Like, this is a really nice torso here. This little arm back here is not so good, is it? You got the fingers and the arm coming out. That's not going to track well. So we're just going to leave that out. Ideally, I would have seen that, said, I like this pose, but let's maybe bring the hand over here, something like that. Or bring it back around the other side in some way or another. And for the most part, I'm just going to do a little torso here. But, let's little analog of the same pose. In here, we got the little hood on bit by Mark Eaton up here. And we'll bring in this head here, although I doubt I'll get to it, and make it a little bit bigger. Maybe bring the drapery here over that. Okay. So that gives me the idea, and then I'll start laying in the painting, as I will do now. And that's a pretty crude drawing, isn't it? So I don't care much if I lose that. That's not a very precious drawing to me. I've done better. So, and that's kind of where I want to be with this. Because I don't want to say, God, that's just such a great shoulder blade. I'm going to fill in color around that so I don't screw that drawing up. I want to make sure that, Trying to decide what color I'm going to paint this. I want to make sure that I'm respecting the fact that this is a painting where I'm creating big shapes of color, and that's the most important thing to get working in the beginning, and then the fact that I'm going to have a specific, very specific shape of arm and all that kind of stuff, that will come later as a secondary idea. Okay, so I'm going to do a fairly cool bit of flesh here. I'm going to thin it out a little bit so I can get it covered a little quicker so we don't spend a lot of time with the application. And notice I corrected that. It was too orange. And so I added some of this green, gray-green orange, or blue-orange, and went over the top, and now both are there. And that gives a little bit of complexity without disrupting the silhouette because they're basically exactly the same color. And then I'm going to go ahead and take this down into the pinks. And notice I'm depending much more on the value than the temperature and intensity. The fact it was a little greener or a little oranger, a little redder, a little grayer, or more intense is not near as powerful of a statement as if it is nice and light. I'm going to make it nice and light. Maybe we'll let this drop off down into the browns. And I'll thin that out. Now, an artist, me included oftentimes, will lay this in, get rid of that white canvas. Whoop, there goes one brush. And let it dry. Okay, so it doesn't have to be a real pretty color. It just needs to be accurate, pretty, truthful relationships, whatever adjective you want to put on that. And notice how the drawing, it looks like he has goat leggings on right now. The drawing is suffering, and that's as it should be. I don't want to be worried about the drawing. I want it to be about the colors. So I'd prefer to have maybe a little more intensity here. So I'm just taking that now. And notice the strategy here. I mix the color and add the color to my painting. And so the mixture is on the palette. But I can also take a color that's been mixed or not and add it to the painting and have it mix on the canvas. And that's always going to be the case. Once that white canvas is done, then I'm going to be getting mixtures on the canvas, because whenever I add a stroke, it's going on the color that's already there, and that stroke is going to blend in some manner with the next stroke unless it's really loaded up. So I've got always got a few ways to go here. You can mix off the canvas, you can mix on the canvas, you can add pigment, you can subtract pigment. Notice if I do this and rub it back, it becomes more of a glaze. I'm seeing through that paint, and the paint all of a sudden gets more intense. So maybe I do additive and subtractive. There's several ways to go. I think I'm going to make him a satyr with goat legs. Looks like he's got fuzzy goat legs. All right, now, let's see, let me get a bigger brush. I'm going to put in that lovely red backdrop. I like that color. And I'm going to make it slightly grayer. And so what I'm trying to do now, as I begin the painting, and this is the problem with painting, the problem with drawing with each of the art forms, is it's not getting one thing. The gesture isn't right unless it's in relationship to the right structure. The sides aren't right unless they're in the right relationship to the ends, the foreground to the background, the light to the shadow. All those things have to be in the right relationships. And so what I'm trying to do here is put in something, not to see that it's absolutely correct. I'm not going to look in the middle of this color and say, yes, that's the right color. I'm going to look at the colors, how the colors come together, and see that they have a relationship that rings true, or that's exciting, or whatever the intention was in the piece. We'll just lose that for now. If we have time to get to it, we will. If not, we won't. All I'm really doing with this is trying to get a big color study. And if we have time to take it farther, terrific. But that's not my purpose. I want those big silhouettes of color to harmonize. And the other strategy I'm doing is, I know darn well, as I work with my particular colors, they're going to get grayer and grayer and grayer. Now, that's not quite true with the stain. The stain, the first time I use it and put it into something, it actually looks a little more intense than it was just squeezed out of the tube. But then quickly it will start to gray too as I start adding more stuff. So the more you work with your colors, no matter what you do to them almost, they're going to get grayer and grayer and grayer. So that means you're probably better off keeping things a little more intense than they should be. Now, the brown school painters have a different process. Since they're working not wet into wet Alla Prima, they're working wet over dry. They can add back intensity by letting this dry out and then glazing it with a glazing color and bring back that intensity, just as we have here. We'll have this then as a film over those grayer colors, and they'll pop out. So this might be Rembrandt before he does his glazes, and then by the time he gets his glazes, it's in this golden yellow range. But in general, make them a little more intense than you think they should be, and then it'll gray down, on its own, sometimes even more than you want, even when you are conscious of that issue. Okay, so now I mixed that red with its primary brothers, and it got a lot grayer. Let's push this into the cools. A red-violet is not a bad way to go, because the red-violet has red in it, and the orange flesh or the brown flesh or even the olive flesh has red in it. And then that makes an easy transition into the orangish light source and light side, possibly, and down in the deeper blues, the steely grays and um, olive greens and all those blue colors that might be popping out or showing themselves. Now notice I have a problem here. I've got to paint the shadows with the light color under them because I wasn't careful enough with my drawing and with my application to fill in around them. So that creates a problem. I have to load my brush up more carefully to pick that stuff up. And so now we have to be careful that look what happens here. We have a lot of that light color coming in and it's getting on my brush. So I'm going to wipe it off, load it up again. And I either have to keep adding in more paint to correct that, or I plan for it and adjust the color that I mix, knowing that it's going to be added to whatever's on the surface already. And I'm just trying to find these shapes more or less now. I just drop that off because we won't get to that. Probably detail too carefully, and if we did, we can always come back and rediscover that structure. Okay, now I'm going to add a gradation to that arm, bring in some of the red blood into that. And lose, maybe even lose it into the background there, but we'll see how that goes. And that's a great way of, time management. If I don't have time to do something, then I'll get a gradation. Okay, and notice that I've completely lost my drawing now. That's okay. We'll find that later or not, depending on time we have. This is going back, and notice the logic that's happening now as we get into the smaller parts of the body, the face, the features, the arms from the torso into the limbs and the hands and such. We're getting more and more blood to the surface, getting redder and redder and redder. Also, though, this is a figure in a red world, surrounded by red. And so as things go away from me, I'm going to let it go into that redder world, and it'll feel like it's going back into the environment. And that's a aerial perspective concept. That's what landscape painters do. As the mountain ranges go into the blue sky, it takes on the color and the value of that blue sky. And that's why those mountains get bluer and bluer and bluer. And that's that whole Purple's Mountain Majesty song with the America the Beautiful anthem, is we're taking the brown or the dirty red ground, earth, soil, and putting it back in space into that blue sky. Red and blue make purple. So we have Purple Mountain Majesty. I won't sing for you, but you can get the idea. All right, so we have a little bit of information there, and I, strictly speaking, was playing with those gradations and those subtleties before I did all this, but I want to get this major idea working before I commit to these. So now let's take that red idea, because it's a red world, or a warm, fiery world anyway that I'm dealing with. And let's say that the plaster looks quite a bit cooler, bluer than this. I'm going to take the blue idea you can see I'm kind of running out of places to put my paint. Again, setting up an excuse for not doing a good job. I can blame someone else. It's so important in your career that you delegate the blame to those around you, so it's never your fault. It's always an important thing to do. So rather than making it blue, I'm going to make it purple. Let me clean my brush off. And notice I got some red in there. I'm going to mix it on the canvas here. Get rid of that red. And we're not going to do much with this. In fact, for a color comp, it might just be, you have no idea it's even a figurative deal going on there. All right, so I'm putting in the green. It's just out of the tube, but notice what I'm doing. I'm thinning it out so the white comes through, so that cool white is graying it out. And it's a green that's very blue, and we have a red that's very blue, and so our color wheel is blue here, red here, green here. So the green is a blue this way, and the red's a blue this way. They get a little closer. So they harmonize pretty well. They harmonize around that blue idea. And again, this is graying a little bit, and there's even a little bit of dirty red in there. And notice if I bring more of that red in there, it starts to relate them. I'm using the same red that I used for here, that grayer version right there.
Well, the great thing about NMA is that each teacher brings something that adds to how you approach the art. I especially love Steve Huston. His is very ordered and structured and very repeatable. That's what's really exciting about his courses is he produces gorgeous stuff, but he shows you exactly how to build up to that.
Okay, and notice I'm still doing big picture stuff. I'm putting gradations in. I'm gradating blue into the yellows and oranges and reds. Grading red into it. Getting that big stuff. Okay, let's see how we want to do this. And if this doesn't work, then I can just come back over with my silhouette and correct it. sometimes you just need to check to see, when I do put a highlight in there, do I have the value range to work with that? And notice how when I get ready to do that, I just did it now, obviously, but if I did it in its appropriate time when it's really ready for it, I'm setting up. I start out with a orange base. It gets warmer or cool as it goes up, warmer as it goes down. And then I put a grayer cool on top of that, and then I hit it with the cool on top of that. And you can see I've set that up. As things catch more light, they get grayer and grayer and cooler because it's a gray cool light. It's just instead of a soft gray cool light like in a Northlight window setup, like that lovely Zorn painting of his wife reading the newspaper. Here it's an impressionistic version of that. And so it's much more intense. And then we're going to want to add a half tone. So do we want that to be cooler or warmer? We'll make it warmer. It'll be an orange. It could have gone to maybe a red purple or a purple or a blue purple or something like that. We'll do it this way, and then I'm going to gradate it back to correct the shape, and then pick up these secondary shapes here. And I'm just kind of looking for a color that I like. I use my finger a lot in this kind of stuff, as you can see. We'll go a few more minutes here. And we get the basic gradations, those basic big statements. A lot of the detail can just be drawn in. And notice when I add in color, I'm putting it in these big areas. I'm doing it pretty strong color. This is pretty garish piece, isn't it? But the colors are in the pastel range for the most part, and so they get along pretty well. But it's pretty over the top in terms of color. But I'm doing that because I know if I decided, I'm not going to do that other painting. I'm having so much fun with this. It's looking like it has so many possibilities. I'm going to spend the next 6 hours painting this. Then I know from experience that it's going to get grayer and grayer and grayer. So I want to make sure that I start out a little more intense, and then I'll probably end up about right. But if I don't, if it gets a little more intense, intensity shows off the color. More color is light. Color equals light. That's one of our formulas. And so if I want more light in my painting, putting in more bright color is one way to do it. It's also one way to make things less harmonious, because the bright colors move away from each other to the edges of the color wheel and give us trouble. But we've kind of keyed things to the red and grayed things out some and mixed each color with a little bit of the other colors near it. And that's going to do its job in terms of harmonizing. Okay, so we have all those ribs there. So rather than trying to get each stair step of rib, if I do it really subtle, I can get away with it. Like what I did there is not horrible. It's not great, but it's not horrible. But what's better probably is to bring that red and orange and whatever and turn that whole egg. And just gradate up. Get that whole big transition there. And then I might well want to get some of these other areas down, but I'm doing them very, very light. And then I'll ease into those a little stronger, a little stronger. Just ghost them in. And then I can always come back and bump it down and make it a stronger statement. And just bring those gradations out. And again, this is really just drawing these things in here. Okay, but the biggest possible statement each time. Gradate the whole torso, then gradate the whole rib cage, gradate the whole arm. And then you can deal with a few little tiny stair steps that are cool and appropriate to be in there. Just like I'll gradate the whole silhouette. To turn that whole silhouette of the torso or that whole shape, egg shape of the rib cage, the biggest possible gradations. Then when I want to render an area in here, I can gradate up against the interruption. So we now have a structure on a structure, and that chest is being blocked by that shoulder girdle structure. So I can come up right against that interruption, correct the shape. Notice I had a little bit of red in there. Correct that shape and then gradate away that way. So now it's going to get very light and go darker as it moves from the highlight or light halftone to the darker shadow area. Okay. Same here. I'll start up against that interruption and then take off. I wiped off most of the paint. Pulled that away in an ever lighter touch. And also it'll have less and less paint on it to do damage. You get a natural gradation there. And then any of these, at any time, we could stop, let it dry, come back in, and say, let's glaze in or paint wet over dry. Some really cool, as in cold blue, not as rockin' trendy. Although I'm that too, I've been told I'm very, very rockin' trendy. But we can do that over a wet or over a dry base. But for we here, that's not an option. And we want to just, we want to be playing with things too so that we can come up with happy accidents. So I'll change directions of the brush too. Now I want to create a gradation off this hip here. So I'm going to come in this way in the area that I'm happy with, blending in the area I want to relate better to, and lay it in there. I'm going to come up over it for a second so I can see it. Okay. And we wouldn't want to do this here, but just so you can see, you know, that's a highlight there. There's a highlight there. Look how it's this dirty kind of ochre brown. And there's a purple version of it. Let me put that in more strongly. So what's a highlight? What color is a highlight? Well, it's going to vary. The highlight here might be the darker halftone here. So it's all relative. In fact, you look at that and that's a little too strong, isn't it? And that was the highlight in another part of my painting. So it's in relationship. This is relatively lighter than this, but it's relatively darker than that. I'm going to glaze over that in effect, even though it's wet on wet. I'm going to stroke it over the top just enough so that it tames down that little area in there. Okay, and then you start adding stuff. You go, geez, it was so much better before. Why did I do that? When in doubt, simplify. Go back to the old solution. Slightly grayed red, and just correct. And then I want it to go to a more orange. And try again. Using the negative shape to correct the positive shape. And so kind of getting used to understanding how much pigment's on your brush becomes really critical for making a well-informed stroke. And generally, especially if you like what's happening, say in a certain area, then correct with a negative shape. Always check the biggest possible statement before you start dealing with the subtleties. And every time you change the value, change the temperature and or intensity. And if you have an area that you want to be less detailed because it's less interesting, less important, or you need to be more discreet because of your audience, then you can just indicate the, almost like it's doing this, indicate the shadow shape, halftone shape, highlight shape, with or without accents. Maybe you'll even indicate the accents in there. And then you can play that in and it suggests it without being too strong in that statement. That's, there's still audiences, of course, where you're going to want to be modest with something. My how-to book that I did, they cropped out most of the buttocks on the back view drawing I did. It was a full figure drawing, and they brought it up right here from a back view because they didn't, in the Midwest, in the Dick Blick website, that audience, which is middle America, is not, they don't want to see naked bodies in the bookstore where their kids are walking through. So they play that down. So obviously there's some of that still. You have a certain audience that you want to play down something. Or it might be, for example, for me, a boxer or a workman, I don't want you to think, is that Muhammad Ali or Sugar Ray Leonard or something like that. I want it to be anonymous, an everyman kind of thing. And so I'll play down the head and maybe even get rid of the head completely so that you can't peg that that piece as a likeness. Because especially when I started, sports paintings were a big deal. And so when I started doing my paintings, they'd say, oh, who's that? I think I recognize that guy. What's the name of that boxer? And I didn't want them to be sports paintings. I was using the boxing as a subject matter. I didn't want it to be the focus. I wanted to be the excuse to talk about something else entirely. All right, so let's stop there.